So now can you guess what I do for a living? Actually, I'm just really interested in the role that teaching and learning can play in making the shift toward a sustainable future. Of course, we wouldn't need education for sustainability if there was no such thing as unsustainable. And let's see, a practice that's unsustainable, for those of you who don't know, is one that undermines the very systems upon which it depends to thrive. The irony is that the countries with the most unsustainable practices are the ones that are the most and best schooled. It's no accident that this is not the work of ignorant people. This is the work of extremely well-educated people with advanced degrees. That's the rub for us as educators. But since all systems are perfectly designed to get the results they get, we can turn this problem into an opportunity and we can create change. We can solve more than one problem at a time, we can minimize the creation of new problems, and we can rethink what and why and how we educate. After all, what's education for? In the service of what, if not a healthy and sustainable future for ourselves and future generations? Think about it. All the professional sectors are already contributing to sustainability. The architects and designers, the urban planners, the local governments, higher education. Where do they think they're going without all the children and young people and their teachers? We can learn how to live well in our places without undermining their ability to sustain us over time. And the foundations of our knowledge, skills, and attitudes are cultivated in our schools, for better or for worse. But we have all the children for 13 years, and we can make extremely good use of that time. But we have to imagine. Now, this may require some new functional pathways for some of you to imagine school as different from you've ever experienced or seen before. So bulk up, stretch out, and see if you can do this. Imagine that we all have a shared understanding that the responsibility of schools is to contribute to our individual and collective potential and to that of the living systems upon which all our lives depend. Imagine that schools are learning organizations. What a concept. Schools as learning organizations. Imagine the potential of all our children and young people in schools during the critical period, the most favorable time for learning, and that we honor them with transformative learning experiences that contribute to their ability and prepare them to participate in and to lead with us the shift toward a sustainable future. So now that we've imagined it, we can actually make it happen. How would we do that? It all begins with a change in thinking. You all might remember Einstein's quote, "The significant problems we face cannot be solved with the same level of thinking we used to create them in the first place." That's because thinking drives behavior, and behavior causes results. Now, it's not so easy for people just to rewire their brains and shift their paradigms. Turns out the ease of shift depends on how much their identity or their status or their autonomy or their money is invested in the old way of thinking and in the old paradigm. Of course, children can change their mental models and rewire their brains all the time because with new knowledge and applied insight. So the challenge for us as adults is, can we remain lifelong learners and change our thinking when required because of new knowledge and applied insights? That's our challenge. So what's the kind of thinking that could get us out of this mess and help us to turn toward a sustainable future? And remember, I say sustainable, not sustain guaranteed. And what kind of thinking is going to help us, is going to get in our way? I have a few ideas about that. First one is read the feedback. Now, if we cannot see or hear feedback, we cannot perceive relevant data for our brains to filter. So what's happening when that happens when we can't see the feedback? Turns out our hardwiring can actually get in the way of our ability to see anything that we haven't already experienced or seen before. So it's literally a case of in-the-box thinking. So what are the results of in-the-box thinking and the inability to read feedback? We often operate without the information we need. We're ignorant, and we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know that. We sometimes exhibit the characteristics of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And sometimes we literally cannot see the feedback that's right in front of us, let alone when it's delayed in time and space. So the thing to pay attention to here is just to move from the hardwiring driving our behavior to the actual results and becoming feedback driven. So that's really it, moving from hardwire and to being feedback driven or results driven, so that we can successively approximate our way to reaching our potential. Healthy systems have limits. Now, hold on to your amygdalas, because I know that US Americans especially do not like the notion of limits. But let me tell you the reason why we have limits and thresholds. The reason for limits and thresholds is simply so that all parts of the system can work well together over time. Limits are our friend. The optimal state of a system is dynamic stability. For the brain, we call it dynamic stability. That's the optimal state for our brain. The optimum state for an ecosystem is dynamic equilibrium. And just to give you an example of how hard this one is for a lot of people, I'll give you one example for where we've been not paying attention to the feedback and exceeding some important limits. We can now measure the supply of biocapacity on the planet, all the life sources for our sources and sinks, against the demand on that biocapacity by humans. And as it turns out, we are dipping into the natural capital at a rate of 20% faster than the replenishment rate. Now, everybody knows you can't take out more faster than you put back in. So that's unsustainable. Everybody knows that. My grandmother knew that. So if you are hardwired to think that resources are unlimited and everything is substitutable, then you can rewire the brain and just remember, systems are your friend. And think about, what are the systems? Ask the question, what are the limits? And then tap the power of them. It's a much better idea than ignoring or exceeding the limits all the time. Put your attention on the power of the limits. Oops. Live by the natural laws. This is another one that seems to trigger the fear state, maybe it's our autonomy, maybe it's our status that we're afraid of. The thing about this one is that it doesn't seem to be the principles and the laws that bother us. Most of us would admit to being law-abiding, and everybody is principled. When I ask people, what are the laws and principles that govern your behavior, I get a long, long list of legal laws. And then I get an even longer list of ethical and moral principles. And then I ask them, I very rarely get a list of natural laws and principles. And I think, okay. So I say, well, what about the natural laws and principles? Maybe a woman over 50 at some point will say, you mean like gravity? And I say, yeah, like gravity. And they look at each other and they have no idea what I'm talking about. So I say, well, like the first law of thermodynamics, for example. That's the one, remember that one? No such place as a way. Well, where do we throw things every day? To this imaginary place we call a way, as if there were such a place. Don't you find that fascinating? So how is it that we all graduated from high school not understanding what the operating instructions are on our planet, so that we can all live well within the means of nature? How is that possible? So if you are hardwired to think that resources, that you're in control, or if you're anthropocentric and you're not even thinking about the health of the natural systems, you can put your attention on the fact that there's no such thing as control in a complex system. Reciprocity is not an option, so you always have that. You can also lead, you can facilitate, you can manipulate, create. Control is just not one of the options on the menu. But actually, you're not really giving it up because you never really had it in the first place. So natural laws and principles are not negotiable. You can count on that. That should give you your certainty trigger a little rest. We are all responsible. Everything we do and everything we don't do makes a difference. A lot of people wonder about this one, especially the kids. The kids want to have this be possible. The adults get a little bit nervous about this one. All we can do is take responsibility for the difference we make. There's no such thing as not making a difference. And that one's pretty simple. Recognize and protect the commons. The commons. The commons are that upon which we all depend and for which we're all responsible. Things like, let's see, trust, sidewalks, libraries, our collective future, our shared future. All these things are commons. So all we have to do to rewire towards those is to think about how to reconcile the conflicts that exist between our individual rights and our responsibilities as citizens to tend the commons. And we just have to make the invisible visible. That's all we have to do. Dan Siegel's work on the neurobiology of we is going to be very, very useful to us on this front in looking at the commons. We're all in this together. We are interdependent on each other and on the natural systems. That is just the way it is on this planet. This is a little systems thinking cartoon that we like to use. These guys up here that are still dry, they've been hardwired to think that they're playing a zero-sum game. But in fact, I would like to argue that they need to rewire their brains to realize that they're playing a non-zero-sum game. If you cut that boat in half, you don't get two boats. And finally, a healthy and sustainable future is possible. We can do this. We can actually turn this ship around, put our minds to it, and make it happen. Intention creates the new potentialities. Ask any quantum physicist about QZE. Intention trumps hardwiring. Ask any brain scientist. There are several of them in the room. We have to intend to make it happen. We're going to need all the creativity, all the leadership, especially the quiet leadership. We're going to need all the true grit. We're going to need everybody. But the good news is that it's already actually happening. We already have examples of schools and communities learning together for a sustainable future. Many, many states, the state of New Jersey, state of Washington, Vermont, many schools, many young people are already making the shift toward a sustainable future, already using all the thinking that we're talking about. I'll give you a couple of stories to get you to be able to visualize what this really looks like, because we don't have to make it up. The state of Vermont, created a standard, a learning standard for education for sustainability about 8 years ago. And Jessie Ruth Corkins would have been about in the 4th grade when that happened. By the time she got to the 9th grade, her science teacher challenged her to convert her school building from oil to some sort of renewable, sustainable energy. So she did. Saved her school building about $30,000 in the first year. Went on to organize a statewide coalition for renewable, sustainable energy in the state of Vermont. Lobbied the legislature for $20 million, 100,000 acres of land for switchgrass and sustainably harvested wood, so Vermont could grow its own renewable energy source. And they did. And by this time, pellet stoves Pellets were the renewable energy of choice. And so she shifted the market for pellet stoves from 1 stove a week to 1,000 stoves a week in the state of Vermont. And by her senior year, she had saved her original school building $90,000 a year. And she just graduated high school. No pressure. Third graders in Portland, Oregon, just preserved an old chimney because they found out that the swifts used that chimney during their migration period to rest on their way to their destination. They found it out, it was going to be destroyed. They stopped it and they preserved it. Third graders are having to be on fire these days. Third graders in Salt Lake City, Utah, just sequestered 4 acres of prime developable property right in the middle of Salt Lake City for a commons. Kids in my hometown here in Brooklyn, in New York, and this particular group was in Bushwick, Brooklyn, did some systems thinking, some what we call upstream problem identification. And they identified the crack house in their neighborhood as the most upstream problem they could deal with within their sphere of influence. So they did. They took it down. They went to the city councilwoman. She said, nobody's ever been able to take it down. We've tried the residents. We've tried the business community. Maybe the kids can do it. And they did. Pretty amazing things are going on all over the country. And what they're doing is using this way of thinking. Tapping the power of limits, recognizing the natural laws and principles, reading the feedback and self-correcting when they need to, making shared commitments, personal commitments to our shared future. So what I invite everybody to do is to put our minds on it, to create a vision for appreciating and moving toward a healthy and sustainable future. And it's going to make a much better story to tell our grandchildren. Thank you very much.